Hello, everyone. This is our class 2, which is International Trade Cooperation. The main objectives on this class are four. We are going to try to understand the basic economic trade models, which are recurrent model, actionality model, trade bargaining model, and enforcing agreements. This chapter is a little bit dense because of the economics models that you need to learn. However, this is an intro class, and this is not an economic faculty, So I'm going to try to explain these models in a basic way, try to highlight the main concepts. So if you have any questions, please read the book. And of course, you are free to send me an email or a message with questions about the models and so on and so forth. No worries. And all the maths behind the models are not going to be included in the quizzes. However, it is necessary that you understand the basic concepts behind the models. Why are we going to understand these models? Because we need to have an economic background in order to understand what are the dynamics behind international political economy. So let's begin with the Ricardian model. The Ricardian model, it's a model that stipulates one question: why should countries trade? In order to answer this question, we need to develop a basic trade model. And this basic trade model needs four basic concepts: production possibility frontier, consumption indifference curves, optimal production without trade, which is the autarky equilibrium, and optimal production with trade, which is the free trade equilibrium. The book tried to explain a little bit and in a basic manner what are the main definitions about these four concepts. However, I'm going to get deep into these concepts and try to analyze in a better way the dynamics behind these four basic concepts. So let's begin with the production possibility frontier. A production possibility frontier is a way to understand how a country decides how to allocate production factors in the production goods. A production factor are finite. Using one unit of labor in the sector X means that the sector Y has one unit of labor less to produce. It shows the opportunity cost, and this opportunity cost has a negative slope. Why? Because as I previously defined, if you use a worker to produce one type of good, the other sector doesn't have that worker to produce another good. That's why there is an opportunity cost. The economy has to decide how the economy is going to allocate workers within sectors in order to achieve a better way to produce more in the country. The opportunity cost could be constant or increase, which means that if the slope in the opportunity cost is constant, the opportunity cost is constant, which means that if you reduce one, if you allocate one worker in sector X, the increase in the production of that sector will be one or two or three goods more. And if you hire more workers, well, you are going to increase their production in that sector in the same amount as one person or one worker. However, when we have increasing slopes, moving the production factors could change the production in different amounts, and it is not constant. So if you hire one worker and the production increases, I don't know, 5, and you hire another one, that increment in the production could be different from 5. So the production possibility frontier is going to be depicted in a space that where the products or the sectors are going to be in the lines as in the slide as you are seeing in this moment. We can assume that we are in a country. Imagine that that country is Rutgers land. And in Rutgers land, there are only 2 sectors, agriculture and manufacture. These 2 sectors use production factors, which are labor and capital. If you use all the labor and capital to produce agriculture goods, we can produce 200 agricultural goods. But if we use all the labor and capital to produce manufactured goods, we can produce only 100 manufactured goods. So at the end, the production possibility frontier represents the production of both sectors and how these sectors are using the finite production factors. Keep in mind, if we want to produce 1 unit of manufactures, we have to reduce our production of agricultural goods. That's why I have depicted these arrows, blue arrows and orange arrows. The blue arrows are saying that if we are going to decrease our production in agriculture, we are going to increase our production in manufacture. The orange arrows are inverse. So it says that if we are going to decrease our production in manufacture, we are going to increase our production in agriculture, which basically we're saying that if we are reducing the production factors used in the agricultural sector, we are going to use these production factors to produce manufacture. In this slide, you can see that we can depict that negative relationship, that opportunity cost, in 2 different ways, in a constant or an increasing way. When we are saying that there is a constant opportunity cost, the slope is constant and the production possibility frontier is aligned. However, when we are talking about an increasing opportunity cost, you can see that the negative relationship between the allocation of production factors is not constant, and the increment or the reduction in the use of production factors in agriculture could increment the production in manufacture in different amounts, depending on where you stand on your production possibility frontier. This is the best way to understand it. Assume that there is a reduction of the production factor used in the manufacturing sector. So we are trying to analyze the orange dynamics arrows. So we are trying to reduce the production in the manufacturing sector. We start imagining that we start producing 80 manufactured goods. And now we are producing only 60 manufactured goods. So we are reducing the production in the manufacturing sector in 20 goods. That means that we have to increase our production in the agricultural sector. However, depending on the slope, the increment in the agricultural sector will be different. If we have increasing opportunity cost, which is the blue line, the curved blue line, we go from A to B. And see that when we reduce the manufactural production in 20 goods, the increment in the agricultural sector goes from 100 110 to 180. But if we have constant opportunity cost, we go from C to D. That is an increment in the agricultural goods from 40 to 80. Notice that the change is constant in the orange line. If there was an additional reduction in the manufacturing sector, and I don't know, imagine that we are reducing from 60 to 40, the increment in the agricultural sector will be from 80 to 120. And you can see that the increment in the other sector is always the same. Basically, we are seeing an increment of 40 units. So the slope shows the trade-off between reducing the production from one sector to increase the production in the other sector. And in this type of models, there are not the possibility that you cannot use all the production factors. So if you have, I don't know, 1 million of workers, you have always to hire the 1 million of workers. There are not unemployment in this type of models. As same as if you have, I don't know, 20 computers, you have to use the 20 computers. It doesn't matter if they are rented in the agricultural sector or in the manufacturing sector. And this slope is a representation of one important concept, that is the marginal rate of product transformation, which measures the rate at which one good must be foregone to produce an additional unit of another good while keeping the total level of production constant. In other words, it quantifies the opportunity cost of producing an additional unit of particular good. So we are in the marginal rate of product transformation, which is the slope of the production possibility frontier. We are measuring the opportunity cost. We are measuring how much we have to sacrifice in the production of one sector if we want to increase the production in the other sector. How much we have to sacrifice in manufacturing if we want to increase our agricultural production. This is basically the production possibility frontier. And in trade economics, the production possibility frontiers are our horse war. Why? Because with this graph, economists could understand how countries could allocate the production factors and how these production factors affect the production in the sectors, and how the economy, which is the summing of all the production of all sectors, are allocating all the production factors available in the economy. One idea before understanding what is consumption indifferences curves is that the production possibility frontier is the best way to understand supply. Why? Because at the end, if you are understanding this concept, we are understanding how the economy is producing products. So given that we assume that there are only two sectors, well, we are covering all the sectors in the economy and all the production in the economy. So all the sectors are interrelated, and depending what is happening in what sector, the other sector, of course, will be affected by the previous sector. And basically, this is saying that what is happening in agriculture is going to affect in the manufacturing sector, and vice versa. What is happening in manufacturing is going to affect the production in the agricultural sector. Okay, but we need to understand consumption. Why? Because in a market, there are two sides. One is supply, which is the production possibility frontier. But on the other side of the market is the demand. We cannot understand an economy only by the production possibility frontier. We're understanding here how sectors produce, but sectors do not produce in abstract. They need consumers because at the end, supply is going to be equal to demand. So firms in the agricultural sector are going to produce agricultural goods because there are consumers that will demand agricultural goods. So firms aim to produce goods in order to satisfy the demand. So that's why we need to understand how people decide consumption. And that's why we're going to understand consumption in difference curves. A consumption in difference curves is a proxy of happiness. In economics, we said that utility. Consumers are happy, are happy if they consume more. However, their utility could be in different ways. So there are two basically types of relations in the consumption. The first one is strictly preferred. So imagine that this person are trying to decide if he wants to consume ice cream or cake. So at the end, that person assess the level of satisfaction that ice cream or cake gives to him. So the utility of ice cream for this person is 9, and the utility of eating cake is 6. Given that 9 is higher than 6, for this person, all the time that he has on the table ice cream and cake, he will decide to buy ice cream. Why? Because ice cream represents higher levels of utility, higher levels of satisfaction. But it could be possible that we have a different type of relation, which is indifferent. What is indifferent? Imagine that the same person is trying to decide to buy an ice cream or a hot dog. So according to his own preferences, the level of satisfaction of eating an ice cream is 9, but the level of satisfaction of eating a hot dog is 9. Given that these goods gives them the same level of satisfaction for that person, every time that he has the opportunity to decide between ice cream or hot dog, he will be indifferent. It doesn't matter which he will decide. At the end, he will get the same level of utility or happiness. So this is basically the way that economists model the consumption. However, this is a little bit more complex because the combination of consumption of agricultural and manufactured goods could be represented in different curves, such as here in this slide. Give me 1 second, please. I'm so sorry. So A and B, for instance, are in different curves because they give the same utility to this person. So we can say in a basic, in relating to the previous slide, that when for this person, ice cream and hot dogs are, given that the ice cream and hot dog gives to that person the same level of utility, well, the consumption of these goods are in different goods, in different curves. Why? Because they represent the same level of utility. In this case, given that we are talking about the economy as a whole, and we are representing in the Rutgers land only two sectors, well, the combination of 60 agricultural goods and 40 manufacturing goods gives the same level of utility to this society as if the society demands 40 agricultural goods and 60 manufacturing goods. However, if you could see, C is in a higher indifferent curve. Why? Because it gives more utility. Consumers are demanding more in both goods. If you could see, the demand of agriculture and manufacturing goods are 70. And this is a rule. If you demand more of if you demand more, you are going to be happier. That's why we are saying here, consumers are happy if they consume more. So that's why C could not be in the same indifferent curve. Why? Because for the society as a whole, they are consuming more of both goods, and that's why they have more utility. Another thing that you could see here is that U2, that is the indifferent curves 2, is in a higher level because is not closer to the origin. What is the origin? Here, when people are consuming zero goods from both sectors. And if the indifferent curve is closer to the origin, well, the level of satisfaction is lower. But if the indifferent curves is far from the origin, the level of utility is higher. Why is curved? Why the indifference curves are curved? Well, because there is something that is declining marginal utility from consumption. For example, if we are moving from A to B, well, if you are at A, you will sacrifice 20 agricultural goods for getting 20 manufactured goods. However, in reality, and that's why there are curves, in reality, people prefer to consume balanced basket consumptions. What does that mean? Imagine that you are in a supermarket and you want to eat something. So basically, you decide to eat one sandwich and one bottle of water. This is a balanced basket consumption basket. And you don't want, it could be possible that another combination of goods could represent the same level of utility. I don't know, imagine that you are consuming 2 sandwiches and instead of 1 sandwich and 1 bottle of water. However, in reality, people prefer to eat and drink at the same time. That's why the best combinations are in the middle. That's why these consumption indifference are curved. The other explanation of that is the slope of the indifferent curves. The slopes of the indifferent curves are the marginal rate of substitution. The marginal rate of substitution measures the rate at which a consumer is willing to trade off one good for another while maintaining the same level of satisfaction or utility. Basically saying that if you want to move from A to B, you have to reduce the consumption of agriculture and increase the consumption of manufacturing, keeping the same level of utility. That's why we are substituting our consumption. If we increase the consumption of both goods, we are going to be in another different indifference curve. That's why the marginal rate of substitution represents the consumers willingness to substitute between two goods in order to maintain a constant level of satisfaction. In different curves, typically bend in toward the origin. Why? Because, again, consumers prefer balanced consumer baskets. You want to, I don't know, you want to go to the theater and you want to buy popcorn and a drink. You don't want to buy 3 drinks only. You don't want to buy only 2 popcorns. You want to balance your consumer baskets. You don't want to only consume agricultural goods. You also want to consume manufacturing goods, TVs, computers, cell phones, but you want also to consume food and so on and so forth. That's why they are curved. Now, we already covered the basic concept of production and demand. However, these concepts are intertwined. In a market, we need to put together the supply and the demand. And this is the equilibrium. However, given that this is international political economy, we are going to divide this analysis into. The first part is the autarky equilibrium. What is an autarky equilibrium? Well, autarky is an economic term that refers to a state or condition of self-sufficiency, which basically means that the economy is independent. Autarky is where a country or an entity seeks to produce and consume all the goods and services it needs without relying on external trade or resources. In other words, autarky is when United States produces all the goods and services that Americans need. In an autarky world, the United States, it's not allowed to sell or buy products from another country. This is the closed economy. The idea of the closed economy was born in 1999, between 1999 and 1945. Why? Because in the period of World War I and World War II, the international market had to close, given that there was the war closes the borders and the production and so on and so forth. Countries were not allowed to trade each other. So that's why it is very important to understand the closed economy idea. However, in the autarky world, well, a country has to produce everything. Why? Because we cannot outsource the production of different goods to another country. And as we previously stated, well, we need agricultural goods, but also we need manufacturing goods. So in an autarky world, well, Rutgers land has to produce agricultural goods and manufactural goods. And when we combine the production side, which is the PPF, and the demand side, which is the indifferent curves, well, we are in the full market equilibrium. For instance, both graphs are depicted in the same space. Why? Because the economy is producing agriculture and manufacturing goods, and consumers are demanding agricultural and manufactured goods at the same time. And the PPF is defining how much to produce of both products, and the indifferent curves is the demand, is defining how much these consumers are going to consume. Basically, if consumers want to demand this point, depicted in red, well, this point is not possible. Why is not possible? Well, because even one could represent a higher level of utility, let's imagine that they prefer this red point and they are consuming more of both goods, well, it cannot be produced. And why it cannot be produced? Well, because it's not represented in or within the PPF. Is outside of the PPF. So it's not possible to be produced. There are not enough production factors to reach this point. The same thing happens if we depict this point inside the PPF. It is possible to be achieved? Yes, we have enough production factors to produce that level of production. However, the problem with this point is that it's not efficient. It's not efficient because we are leaving out some production factors, and we can utilize those production factors to produce more. And remember, in this model, we are not talking about unemployment, and we are assuming that all the workers, all the labor, and all the capital should be used in order to produce. So this part is not efficient. The only efficient point in the PPF are on the PPF line. So this is the only possible equilibrium. I'm going to put it in gray. Right. It's possible and efficient. However, you can see that this green point could be in different parts of the PPF. Could be here or here, or even in the extremes. So which one is the equilibrium? Which one is the optimal point? Because we already know that if the production is on the line of the PPF, is possible and efficient. Well, the optimal point is decided by the demand. So given that the demand is here, is touching the PPF, well, this is the equilibrium. In an equilibrium, demand is equal to the supply. They are equal because firms do not have incentive to produce more or less than the consumers are demanding. Consumers are willing to spend all their income to consume goods. That's why they want to satisfy the higher level of utility that they could achieve. So they have income. You have income, and with your income, you can buy things. And given that economies define utility based on the level of consumption, well, you have incentive to spend all your money in buying goods in order to get more happy or being happier. So that's why the equilibrium is where is that point where the demand is equal to the supply. If we move the utility in a different way, I don't know, for instance, here, well, if this is the case, the equilibrium changes. It's not be this one, it could be this one, right? So that's why in an autarky world, a country has to produce everything, and the combination of agriculture and manufacture will be decided by the consumers, by the preference of the consumers. If the consumers value more agriculture than manufacture, well, the equilibrium could be very close to the y axis. But if the country or the citizens of this country value more manufacture than agriculture, well, the equilibrium could be very close to the x axis. In the process of supply and demand, well, the prices are defined. So the prices are defined by the market. Firms that produce agricultural goods trade their products, and consumers want to demand these products to the price PA. And firms that produce manufactured goods trade their products, and consumers want to demand these products to the price PM. So in that process of bargaining, well, the equilibrium not only decides how much the agricultural sector will be produced, but also they will decide how much the manufacturing sector will be produced, and the market will decide the prices or the exchange terms in which those products will be traded in the market. The equilibrium also is defined when the slope of the PPF, which is the marginal rate, which is the marginal rate of product transformation, is equal to the slope of the indifferent curve, which is the marginal rate of substitution, which is here. And this is the autarky model. So in the autarky model, we have the supply, we have the intuition behind the PPF, and we have the demand. And we already know the intuition behind the utility curves and so on and so forth. So in this scenario, or in this example, sorry, we have Rutgers land is producing 120 agricultural goods. They are producing 80 goods of manufactured goods at PA and PM as prices. This is one part of the story. The other part of the story is that given these prices, the Rutgers citizens decide to demand at equilibrium 120 agricultural goods and 80 manufacturing goods. So in an autarky, demand is equal to supply. But after 1945 and before 1991, the world has been open, and there has been globalization before 1991 and after 1945. What does that mean? So before to answer that question, we have to answer a most important question, which is why do countries engage in trade? This question is very important. Why? Because if a country is able to be self-independent, and if a country could produce everything that the country needs without depending on others, why there is free trade? Why there is trade among countries around the world? So why do countries engage in trade? So according to David Ricardo, which was one of the most important economists at the end of the 19th century, according to David Ricardo, everyone is better off in an open world. Every single person in the world is better off if there is international trade. This is the conclusion of David Ricardo at the end of 19th century. In order to explain that, we have to develop the Ricardian model. So we are going to make some assumptions here in order to explain the basic dynamics of this model. The first assumption is that we are going only talk about 2 countries. Of course, there are more than 2 countries around the world. There are around 200. However, 2 countries is an assumption to keep the things basic. We can extrapolate the conclusions of 2 countries to 200 countries or more. And the conclusion will not be different. So 2 countries is better only to explain in an easy way the basic dynamics of a Ricardian model. The second assumption is that we are still keeping this idea that there are only 2 goods, agriculture and manufacture. Of course, you know that there are more than 2 goods in a market, but we are clustering all the goods in only 2 sectors. Why? Because it's easier to depict everything in 2 dimensions. For humans, we can depict everything at tops in 3 dimensions, but we have infinite types of products. So if we expand this in more than 2 goods, it is possible to prove the Ricardian model, but only with math, and this is not the level of this class. So we're going to keep the things easy. So only 2 goods. Imagine that we have 2 countries. These countries are the United States and China. And we have 2 sectors, manufacture and agriculture. In this matrix, you could see the output per worker per year. Basically, it's saying that one worker in United States, if that worker is employed in the manufacturing sector, that worker could produce 50 goods. But if that worker moves and is hired in the agricultural sector, that worker could produce 200 goods, the same worker. In China, is a different story. A worker, a Chinese worker, if it is employed in the manufacturing sector, that worker could produce only 5 goods. But if that worker is hired in the agricultural sector, that worker could produce 175 goods. So we are talking about production factors, sectors, and countries. This is basically the Ricardian model. What conclusion could be inferred from this matrix? If you want to stop the video here and try to analyze this matrix, please do it, and then we can continue in the next slide. Okay. So the first conclusion that we can infer from this matrix is that United States is more productive. Why is more productive? Well, because it doesn't matter the sector, one American worker can produce more computers or more apples than Chinese worker. Imagine that this is not, we're not talking in abstract of manufacturing goods. We're going to talk about computers. And we are not going to talk in abstract of agricultural goods. We're going to talk about the production of apples. So the first thing that we can infer from this matrix is that United States is more productive. A worker, an American worker, can produce more of both goods. This is a very important concept that is called or named absolute advantage. When we are talking about absolute advantage, is when a country is more productive than another country in every single thing. So United States is more productive than China in producing computers and in producing apples in this example. But in reality, we can say that United States is more productive than another country. I don't know. I'm from Colombia. So I know that United States is more productive than Colombia in every single product. Why? Because United States has more technology, more human capital, more infrastructure, more investment, more better rules, and so on and so forth, right? So this is the idea of absolute advantage, and it happens in the world that some countries are better than others in producing everything, and this is a reality. However, we are going to change a little bit our first question, why do countries engage in trade? And we are going to modify that question in this question. Why US has incentive to trade with China in this example? But you can extrapolate this question in another couple of countries that you can imagine. So why the US has incentive to trade with China if the US has an absolute advantage? Why the United States has incentive to produce only computers and buy apples from China if United States could produce more apples than China because their workers are more productive. This is a very important question in international political economy. So the best answer is try to understand that there are differences in opportunity costs. And as we covered in the class 1, we are not in the mercantilism theory. We are in the liberalism theory. In the liberalism, instead of mercantilism, well, we are not talking about absolute. We are going to talk about relative things. So suppose that we move one American worker from computers to apples to produce instead of producing computers, we're going to hire that person in producing apples. Remember that we are in the PPF. So if we move one worker from the manufacturing sector to the agricultural sector, we have to sacrifice production in the manufactural goods to increase the agricultural goods. So we lose 50 computers for 200 apples, which is basically this matrix, right? So we are, I'm so sorry, just give me 1 second. Thank you. So if we move one worker from the manufacturing sector, we are sacrificing 50 computers to get 200 apples. This is basically what we are saying here. For additional apple produced, the United States must forego 0.0 25 computers, 1/4 of a computer. If we want to increase one apple, we have to sacrifice 1/4 of a computer. To keep the things easy, we are going to use the concept of constant opportunity cost here. We are not going to talk about this increasing or decreasing marginal rate. Why? Because if we want to talk about more with this type of marginal rate of production transformation, we have to include some calculus, and this is not the level of this class. So we are going to keep the levels very easy. So we are going to talk about constant opportunity cost. So saying that, the constant opportunity cost of each apple is 1/4 of a computer. But we can make the things other way around. If we move one worker from the agricultural sector to the manufacturing sector, well, we are sacrificing 200 apples to produce 50 computers. So at the end, the opportunity cost of each computer is 4 apples. The opportunity cost of an apple is 1/4 of computer. So if we are following the idea here, the opportunity cost is represented by the or in terms of the other product. So the opportunity cost of an apple should be in terms of a computer, because the worker is now producing apples and that worker is not producing computers. And the opportunity cost of a computer should be in terms of an apple. Why? Because the worker is not producing apples and now he is producing computers. So here is 4 apples because right now is 200 divided by 50 computers. And this is 4 apples. This is the opportunity cost. We can also create the opportunity cost for China. Suppose that we move one Chinese worker from computers to apples. So we are here, we are moving the Chinese worker from computers to apples. So the Chinese worker is producing computers, and now we are going to move that worker to the agricultural sector. So we have to sacrifice the production of computers to get more apples. How much apples that worker will produce? Well, 175. How much computers the economy is not producing? 5 computers. So this is the opportunity cost. So we lose 5 computers for 175 apples. For each additional apple produced, China must forego 0.03 computers, which is the division of 5 divided by 175. Having said that, the opportunity cost of each apple should be in terms of computers. So the opportunity cost of each apple is 0.03 computers. The opportunity cost of a computer should be in terms of apples. So the opportunity cost of each computer is 35 apples. In this matrix, well, we are not only establishing the relationship between the two countries, the two sectors, and how is the productivity of a worker in each country and in each sector, but also we are now representing the opportunity cost in each country. So the opportunity cost is the key for the Ricardian model, not the absolute advantage. Why? Well, because what is relatively cheaper to produce computers? This is a very important question. Where is relatively cheaper to produce computer? So we are not talking about absolutes. We are talking about relative terms. So in the US, it costs 4 apples. In China, it costs 35 apples. So China has to renounce more apples to get one computer. So it's more costly in China to produce a computer because it costs more apples. The other question could be, what is relatively cheaper to produce apples? In the US, the cost of producing an apple is 1/4 of a computer. But in China, that cost is lower. It's only 0.03 computers. So in China, it's costly to produce computers, and in the US, it's costly to produce apples. But what does that mean? So basically what we are saying here is that given that the production factors are finite, well, it is an important decision to the country to allocate the production factors wisely. And I mean wisely in relative terms. So given the structure of the economy in the US, producing a computer is or is cheaper than in China. And given that the economic structure of China, according to this example, China should produce only apples because the opportunity cost of producing apples is lower than in the US. Which means that China should produce apples because if they decide to use their production factors to produce computers, well, the cost of the computers are high. And this is the Ricardian model. So the Ricardian model is trying to represent this opportunity cost. So, but before going further, we have to, again, divide the analysis into closed economy and free trade economy. So let's begin with the autarky scenario. In the autarky scenario, well, the US and China have to produce both goods. Why? Because they are not allowed to trade each other. So Americans and Chinese people demand apples and computers. And so given that, these lines that I'm selecting in the video, well, are the PPF. So if Americans decide to produce, to use all the workers to produce only apples, well, they only have the maximum apples that a worker could produce, which is 200. But if they decide to employ all the consumer workers into the computer sector, well, a worker only could produce 50 computers. The same as China. China, a worker could produce a maximum of 175, and a worker can produce only 5 computers. This is the maximum level, and we cannot produce more apples because a worker cannot produce more than 200 apples in the US. And here, we cannot produce more than 175 because a worker only could produce 175. The same as in computers. A worker cannot, in the US, an American worker can produce only 50 computers, and we cannot produce 51, 52, 53, and so on and so forth. And the same as in China. A worker can produce only 5 computers, and this is the maximum demand that of computers that in China could be. Because if they want to consume 6, 5, or more than 5, well, it is not possible because a worker can, it is only allowed, or it's only possible for a worker to produce 5 computers. So given that, this is the supply part of their economies. But we have also the demand, which is the in different curves. So and this is an autarkic model, so they have to produce both goods. In this example, we are assuming that the equilibrium is given by the point where the demand is equal to the supply. So in this case, the American economy is demanding 100 apples and 25 computers, and in China, per worker, and in China, they are demanding 70 apples and 2 computers per worker. However, what happens if they open their economies? So we are living in a globalized world. We can go right now to a supermarket and we can find products made in every single part of the world. So we have to understand what happens if we open their economy in this example, given that the world is open, or try, or tends to be opened. So in free trade, even when the US has absolute advantage, they could specialize in one product. Normally, countries with absolute advantage decide to specialize in those goods with higher prices and more added value. Why? Well, because this is a little bit a debate that we are going to cover at the end of the class. But keep in mind this, even when there is a comparative advantage that we are going to define in a few minutes, well, if the US is more productive in every single product, well, they have the power to decide in which products they want to specialize. The products are not the same if we compare products in the world. It's not the same level of human capital that is needed to produce an apple that the requirements of human capital that you need to produce a computer. You need more investment in education if you want to produce computers. You need more investment and more infrastructure in your economy if you want to be productive to produce high-tech goods. This is the idea of added value. And with that added value, you will receive higher rewards, higher prices. You can charge higher prices. That's why industrialized countries has moved to their production, or the developed countries have moved their production to high-tech goods. So that's why the US could specialize in producing computers. And if they produce only computers, well, China should produce apples. But this is one part of the story. The other part of the story is what Ricardo is saying to us. Notice that China has comparative advantage in producing apples. We already answered that question. Why? Well, because in China, the opportunity cost in terms of computers is lower than the opportunity cost in the United States. If they decide to produce apples, well, it's higher the opportunity cost in terms of computer in the United States than in China. And because of that, we are finding that it's more efficient to the world to assign to the United States to produce computers and to China to produce apples. And this is the most important concept in the Ricardian model. Not the absolute advantage, it's the comparative advantage. It doesn't matter that the US has absolute advantage. It doesn't matter that the US is more productive to produce every single product in the world. It's better if we allow to the United States to specialize in those goods in which the United States has lower opportunity cost to produce them, and give the production of the other goods to other countries, because those countries comparatively have lower cost to produce them. So one of the most important conclusions in the Ricardian model is the specialization patterns. The US produce only computers. They consume American computers, but they produce more than the American demands. And the excellence of, or the difference of the computers that they are producing, but the Americans are not demanding, well, they are going to export those computers to China. And with that economic interaction, they could get income to import apples from China. Those apples that they decide to sacrifice in order to produce more computers at lower price, because they have lower cost. China, on the other hand, is producing only apples. They consume Chinese apple, which means they produce to satisfy their national demand, but they produce more apples than the Chinese people are demanding. Why? Because they want to export apples to the US. And in that exchange, they could import computers from the US at lower prices. Why? Because US has lower cost to produce computers. So this is basically what Ricardo found, and that's why he established that everyone is better off in an open world, because we as consumers could buy products at lower prices. So there are change in the prices. Why? Because the US produced computers with a lower price than China, and China produced apples with a lower price than the US. So the reduction in prices allowed to consumers in both countries to buy more goods. Their income could buy more because prices are cheap. The income of the Americans has not changed. I don't know, imagine that I'm earning $100. So I'm not receiving a raise. But in fact, in reality, is similar that I am receiving a raise. Why? Because even that America is not producing apples, they are now importing those apples from China, and those apples have lower prices. Well, my $100 could buy more apples, which is basically very similar if I had received a raise in my income. Based on that, the Ricardian model changes. The idea of equilibrium in the PPF and in different curves. So we are here. No, remember, we are here in the autarky model. But right now, the US is not producing 100 apples. We are going to produce 0 apples. Why? Well, because we are going to produce only computers. And we are going to outsourcing the production of apples to China. And China, in the same way, is not going to produce any computer. They are going to buy the computers from the US. So in that specialization scenario, which is represented by the blue squares, the production in the US is represented here. 0 apples and 50 computers per worker. The production in China is 0 computers and 175 apples per worker. That does mean that US is not going to consume apples? No, they are going to consume apples. They produce more computers than the American need. And this difference, the 25 computers per worker, are going to be exported to China. And with that in exchange, Americans could import apples with lower prices. Given that the price is changing, given that the price of the apples is reducing, well, the income of the Americans increases. So that's why there is a shift. Sorry, there is a shift in the PPF to the right. Why? Because in an open world, demand is not equal to supply. So this shift to the right represents the income effect of the trade. Americans could buy more because prices are lower. And that's why they are consuming more. And given that they are consuming more, their utility is higher. So the utility, not in an autarky world, but in a free trade world, that's why I put here FT, is higher. They are consuming more than in the closed economy scenario. But the same thing is happening in China. Chinese people are able to exchange apples to computers, computers that they could buy at lower prices. And that's why there is an income effect here, and the consumption could be higher. And that's why they could achieve a higher level of utility in a free trade scenario. And because of that, Ricardo thought at the end of the 19th century that free trade is the better scenario to a world, to an economy. Okay, guys. If you have questions about this concept, I'm trying to explain this model um, in a basic terms. I know that this is an asynchronous class. So if you have questions, please don't hesitate and send me an email or a message, and I will be happy to answer your questions. So let's move to a different model, which is the Herschel-Olin model. So we already answered our first question. Why do countries engage in trade? Well, because even when a country could have absolute advantage in producing every single good, for that country is sufficient to only specialize in producing those products in which that country could have lower opportunity cost. And that represents higher levels of utility because the world specialized the production of goods in countries where the cost of production is lower, so the prices of the products, of the goods, are going to be lower. So consumers around the world could buy more goods at the end. And they could have higher levels of utility. But Herschel-Olin model are going to complex the story. Why? Because the Herschel-Olin model answered this question. Why does one country have a comparative advantage in one area? We are not talking about this. We have not talked about this in Ricardo model. We assume that there are some productivities in that matrix, and the worker could represent or produce or have high levels of utility, and we assign some numbers of production in computer sector and Apple sector and so on and so forth. But we have not explained what explains the comparative advantage. So Herschel-Olin model establishes that the comparative advantage depends on the availability of the production factors. What does that mean? So that means that the comparative advantage is intertwined with the availability of production factors within a country. So we can classify the countries in two different types: capital abundant countries and labor abundant countries. If a country is a capital abundant, means that that country has more capital than labor. If a country is a labor abundant, it's because that country has more labor than capital, than physical capital. That country has more people than capital. Capital abundant countries are countries that have more investment, more infrastructure, more buildings, computers, cars, technology, and so on and so forth, than people. Labor abundant countries, on the other hand, are countries that, of course, they have capital, they have physical capital, they have computers, TVs, and building houses, and so forth, but they have more people than capital. And this is the demand and supply laws. If a country is a capital abundant, well, given that there are more capital than labor, well, the cost of capital is lower in relative terms than in a country with more labor than capital. in a capital abundant, given that there are lower levels of workers than in capital, well, workers are scarce. So the price of labor, which is the wage, should be higher than the price of capital, which is the rent. On the other hand, labor-abundant countries, well, the cost of labor is lower in relative terms because the cost of the capital is higher. The capital is scarce. So the rent is higher than the wage that you have to pay to the worker. However, now try to imagine or picture this. If you are in a capital abundant country, such as United States, and there are more capital than workers, well, it is possible to understand that these type of countries could specialize in producing manufacture than agricultural goods. Why? Well, two reasons. The first reason is very simple. Well, to produce manufacture, you need more capital than labor. The second reason is because if you have capital and the capital is lower, has a lower price, the rent is lower, well, it's cheaper for this economy to produce these types of products. Remember Ricardian conclusion. At the end, you're going to produce those sectors in which your cost on your opportunity cost is lower. But in fact, the cost of production of producing manufacture in these countries will be lower because the cost of the capital is lower. And we are here saying one thing that we're going to cover in a few minutes is that manufacturers are capital intensive. To produce manufacture, you need more capital than workers. You need more technology than humans to produce manufacturers. Of course, you need some humans, some workers, but you need more capital than human labor. In the other, on contrary, in the labor-abundant countries, well, given that there are more labor, well, the price of the labor is cheaper, and the cost of producing agriculture, and given that agriculture is labor intensive, well, is lower. I need more labor to produce agriculture. Here in my country is labor abundant, so the price of the labor is cheaper, so the cost of producing agriculture is cheaper. So I'm going to specialize in that country. So that's why Herschel model suggests that countries have advantage in producing certain types of goods because of different endowments. So the productivity that we explain in this matrix, according to the Herschel model, is because we are referring the United States as a capital abundant country, and we are referring China as a labor abundant country. So what drives comparative advantage? Well, it is not the difference in the cost of any single factor of production. It is the difference in the cross-national relative abundance. The cross-national relative cost of factor of production is what determines the comparative advantage. So even if Americans can make more computers than Apple, absolute advantages, they should still shift to exporting computers and importing apples because the United States is a capital abundant. And as a capital abundant country, the cost of using capital is lower, and therefore the cost of producing computers is lower. So this is very important. This is very important in trade economics. When I teach this class, is more difficult because we have to develop two different concepts, which are short-term and long-term, and the Herschel-Lin is a long-term model, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to explain that here in this class, but keep in mind that at the end, if you have more capital in your country in relative terms than another country, well, producing goods that needs more capital than labor, well, the cost of producing those products will be lower. So this is your comparative advantage. And you can be competitive in the international market because if you have a lower cost, your price, your final price, the price that you want to sell your products in the international markets are going to be lower than your competitors. And that's the reason that explain comparative advantages. However, in the book, you will see, or you have read, that there is some patterns to every single country around the world to protect their economies. And that is why we need to explain this model that is trade bargaining. The trade bargaining is a model that tries to understand this question. Why is there protectionism? So why there is protectionism? We have already explained two basic models that both models have the same conclusion. Free trade is the best strategy to get higher levels of utility. But not only utility. Free trade is an increment of your efficiency. You will be more productive because you will be specialized in those sectors in which you have a lower cost. Not only the opportunity cost, the actual cost of production. So why there is protectionism? What is protectionism? Protectionism is when a country establish some barriers to the international trade. So there are many types of protectionism that we are going to cover in a different chapter in this book. But basically, protectionism is when a country erase barriers, such as tariffs or quotas, to raise the international price that the other country is selling their products and to close their economy. So imagine that you want to buy an apple. American government is very worried about the farmers, apple farmers. So we know that if we buy the apple from China, we have to pay, I don't know, I'm going to say whatever, $1. But if we produce the same apple here in the United States, we have to pay $2. So that's why we're going to specialize in computers, and China is going to specialize in apples. But these farmers create a lobby, and they move people around their situation and so on and so forth, and the government decide to protect them. So they impose a tax, which is a tariff in the international market. A tariff is a tax, is similar to a tax. So if you want to import an apple from $1, you have to pay a tax, which is the tariff. And we are going to put that tax at $2. So you have to pay the $1, which is the price of the Chinese price of the apple, and $2 in addition for the tariff. So at the end, you have to pay $3. And now you have incentive to buy that apple from national producers. Why? Because the American farmers are producing the same apple to $2. So right now, $2 is lower than $3. So you have incentive to buy locally instead of international. So that's why there is protectionism. So we have to talk about losers from trade, but this concept will be covered in the next class. So here, basically, we want to develop how countries negotiate each other in order to open their economies. Basically, countries want to protect their sectors that do not have comparative advantages. So workers and firms in these sectors will be affected by international trade. Why? Because if we are a farmer and right now China is producing the apples, well, you have to close your firm. You have to close your farm. So that's why some workers and some firms will be affected if those sectors are not in or doesn't have comparative advantages. But this idea is more political than economic. So industrialized countries, which are capital abundant, want to protect their agricultural sectors. Why? Because as we have found in the Herschel, well, they have to specialize in manufacturing instead of agriculture. And the same story in developing countries. Developing countries are labor abundant, so they want to protect their manufacturing sectors because those sectors are going to be affected by the international trade. So they protect their sectors for international trade through tariffs, or quotas. And a tariff is a tax or duty imposed by a government on imported or exported goods. It is a form of trade barrier that increases the price of foreign goods in the domestic market, making them less competitive compared to domestically produced goods. However, they know that the free trade could enhance their utility, but that process of opening is a bargaining process. Why is a bargaining process? Well, it's a bargaining process because even when this is political, they want to get better terms in the international market. They have the prerogative to impose these tariffs to protect their sectors. But they could exchange the protection of these sectors to get better terms in the international market. So keep in mind that. So this is more political than economic. So if we talk only with economic terms, protectionism is not an option. But right now we are in the political side of the story. So that's why we need to explain the bargaining process. The bargaining process is explained in the book with this graph. So this graph is depicted in two dimensions. So the y-axis is the tariffs that a government could impose in the manufactured goods. The x-axis is the tariff that a government could impose to protect the agricultural sector. So if one point or is depicted in this space and is very close to the origin, which is 0, well, there are no tariffs at all. But if the point or the the point is depicted far from the origin, well, there are more tariffs imposed in those sectors. So each point within the two-dimensional bargaining space represents a combination of trade barriers in industrialized countries and developing countries. So keep in mind two things. What are the strategies here? So industrialized countries are very good producing manufacturers. So they do not want that the world protect manufacturing. Why? Because they want to sell manufacturers at lower prices and with no competitors. Developing countries, on the other hand, they are very good producing agricultural goods. So they do not want to protect agricultural goods because they have the lower cost to produce agriculture. However, the industrialized countries want to protect the agricultural sectors, their agricultural sectors, and the developing countries want to protect the manufacturing sectors because they are not good producing these types of goods. So because of that, we can depict as an orange point the industrialized country preferred situation. The industrialized country preferred situation is very close to 0 in the y-axis because they do not want to impose any tariff to manufacturers. But this point is very far from the origin in the x-axis. Why? Because they are imposing higher tariffs to protect the sector that they are not competitive, which is agriculture. The green point is a different story. It's very far in the y-axis because developing countries are not competitive producing manufacturers. However, the green point is very close to the origin in the x-axis because they do not impose higher tariffs to protect agriculture because they are very good producing these types of goods. So because of that situation in which there are a clash of preferences, there is something that is called a status quo. The status quo is characterized by a fairly high level of protection in both sectors. So given that developing countries do not want to liberalize manufacture and industrialized countries do not want to liberalize agricultural, well, they are on a status quo, which is very far from the origin and represents a higher levels of tariffs in both sectors. And it's represented by this gray point. So in this part of the class, we can ask ourselves, well, if we already know the models of Ricardian model and Hersheynovian model and not the dynamics of the model, but the conclusion of the model, which says that free trade is very good for a country in terms of utility and in terms of efficiency, what happens if a country decides to liberalize unilaterally? That means what happens if, I don't know, Europe decides to eliminate any type of tariffs in agricultural? unilaterally. It doesn't matter what is going to do the developing countries. Europe as a whole, want to eliminate any type of barrier. Well, given that the status quo is characterized by a fairly high level of protection in both sectors, well, if that happens, if the industrialized countries decide to reduce their tariffs, well, the status quo is going to move as is depicted here in the slide. The status quo is going to move or shift to the left, vertically. A unilateral reduction is not possible at the end, as you can imagine. Why? Because if the other countries, which are the developing countries, do not reduce their tariff, well, they are not protecting their weakest sector, which are the agricultural sector. They are producing manufacturers, but those manufacturers are protected in the developing countries. So this is pretty unfair. And they are now trying to buy, they could buy products from countries at lower prices in the agricultural sector, but the problem is that those sectors are going to close, and that could create unemployment and so on and so forth. So the unilateral reduction is not possible, because if they do it and the other countries are not willing to do it to reduce their tariffs, well, neither group can realize higher utility by engaging in unilateral liberalization. Industrialized countries are going to be worse off because they cannot sell their products in the international market. Remember, developing countries protect their markets from manufactured goods produced in those countries, and their sectors that produce agriculture goods, well, they are going to close. So that's why an unilateral liberalization is not possible, and it is not a good strategy. So they have to negotiate their terms of reduction of tariffs, and this is the bargaining space. So what neither is willing to do the liberalization unilaterally, both are willing to do through international bargaining. All outcomes that each group prefers to the status quo are represented by these circulars, or these cycles. These cycles are the indifferent curves centered upon each group's ideal point, which is the green point and the orange point that we already explained. And the radius of the circle is the distance between the ideal point and the status quo. So, which is this. This is the radius that we are talking about. Let me put this in green. And now we are going to depict the radius of industrialized countries. So each group prefers all outcomes interior to this indifferent curve, to the status quo. Why? Well, because if the status quo moves closer to the green point, well, that means that they are not moving their tariffs, they are not eliminating their protection, and the other group of countries are doing their reduction of tariffs. So they could protect the, I don't know if you are in the developing countries, the industrialized countries are reducing their the tariffs in the agricultural goods, and the developing countries are not reducing or reducing in a lower rate their protection in the manufactured goods. So the combination of the indifferent groups creates a bargaining space. So this is the bargaining space. So we are not going to move further than the status quo, but we can negotiate. So it is the combination of tariffs in which both groups of countries could be better off. And that combination of tariffs is this blue area, that is joint gains. In the joint gains are the combinations of tariffs in the agricultural goods and in the manufactured sectors that both countries could find a possibility of being better off. So the international bargaining, therefore, enables government to liberalize domestic sectors that they are unwilling to liberalize unilaterally. The industrialized countries are willing to reduce the protection of agricultural goods if the developing countries reduce their tariffs on manufactured goods and vice versa. So it is here and only here in the blue area where there are the possibility of a negotiation. So we have to keep in mind a fact which is very important in this type of models, and we are going to get deep into the class later on, which is basically that bargaining power determines which distribution of gains governments ultimately select. So there is not only a bargaining space in abstract. Countries have bargaining power also. Why? Well, because if the point is closer to the preferred situation, well, this is our preferred negotiation point, but could be G, M, or E. So G, for instance, is a negotiation in which developing countries are better off because there are higher reduction in agricultural goods, in the tariffs of that protect agricultural goods, than in manufactured goods. It's closer to the green point. E, on the other hand, is a negotiation in which industrialized countries are better off because there are a high reduction in manufactured goods than in agricultural goods. And M could be this ideal negotiation in which both groups of countries have the same power, the same reduction. However, remember, if a country is more powerful than the competitors, well, they could create a negotiation that satisfies better their preferences. So if we connect all points of the indifferent curves that are tangent one to another, which is the M point, well, this is the contract curve. The contract curve is a set of mutually benefit agreements that exhaust available joint gains. So here is very important. Why? Well, because this is something that we are going to cover at the end of the class when we are going to talk about the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and so on and so forth, how was built and their limitations, so on and so forth. But keep in mind one thing. Industrialized countries create the World Trade Organization in order to control and guide the international market. However, which is not a hidden story, is that the WTO only regulates manufactured goods. So by law, no one in the world could impose tariffs to protect the manufactured goods. Why? Well, because that institution, that international institution, was built by industrialized countries. But what they left out in the negotiation up to now, up to date, is that agricultural goods were left out to the negotiation, which means that industrialized countries could protect their weak sectors, their agricultural sectors. They could impose tariffs and quotas to prevent products from another countries enter to their economies. So that's why they move, in fact, their point to the E negotiation and not to the M. And this is the reason that in the book we are going to talk about the bargaining power. Bargaining power determines the distribution, the gains distribution. This is not given by the market. It's given by the power of the governments. And if the government is bigger and is more powerful, well, the terms of the negotiation to liberalize the economy could be more aligned to the preferences of the powerful state. So finally, we are going to summing up the basic conclusions that we are talking about in the last models. Well, in the two first models, well, we cover this idea of why countries engage to trade each other and why and how it is very beneficial to countries to trade each other. In the last model, well, we said, okay, but the bargaining or the liberalization is not unilaterally. It's more dependent to a bargaining process. So in that sense, countries could protect their sectors, even when we are not talking about the real arguments behind this idea of protectionism that we are going to cover in the next section. But basically, countries could protect their sectors. However, if these countries reach a negotiation, how they could enforce that types of agreements? This is a very good question, because a country could say, okay, yes, okay, you are more powerful than me, so I'm going to say yes to your terms, but maybe tomorrow I'm going to betray you and say, no, this agreement is not fair, so I'm not going to follow that agreement, and I'm sorry, I am not going to be abide by the agreement. So how we could enforce the agreement? So if countries want to protect their non-competitive sectors, but know that foreign trade is beneficial, how can they guarantee that trade agreements are sustained over time? So we have to keep in mind that countries could have incentive to betray. Politically, governments want to protect. It's not the same political discourse made by Trump, try to protect their sectors, the economy, the American economy, than, I don't know, Bush 1 and 2, that they want to open the economy. It doesn't matter the sector, right? I'm talking about the same type of Republican presidents, and because you could say, okay, but if the president is a Democrat, well, that could influence their decision. And I said, and I agree with you. But the thing is, even in the Republicans, well, the political discourse could change and has changed over time. So governments want to protect, and governments and countries could have incentive to betray. So the best way to explain this situation is through the prisoner dilemma. Why? Well, because the prisoner dilemma is a concept in game theory that illustrates a situation in which two individuals, in this case, countries, acting in their own self-interest and may not achieve the best outcome due to the presence of conflict interest. What does that mean? So I'm going to again explain a concept in economics. Maybe you know what is a prisoner dilemma, maybe not. So I'm going to explain the basics, dynamics and the basic rules in the game theory prisoner dilemma. So this is an example. There are two members of a criminal gang, A and B, and they are arrested and imprisoned. Each prisoner is in a solitary confinement with no means of communication with their partner. The principal charge would lead to a sentence of 10 years in prison. However, the police do not have the evidence for a conviction. They plan to sentence both to 2 years in prison on a lesser charge, but offer each prisoner a bargain. This is very important, guys. If one of them confesses to the crime of the principal charge, betraying the other, they will be pardoned and free to live, while the other must serve the entirety of the sentence instead of just 2 years for the lesser charge. So we have the following possible outcomes. If the prisoner 1 or player 1 and player 2 both remain silent, they will each serve the lesser charge of 2 years in prison. They do not have enough proofs to say that they committed the crime. However, if the player 1 betrays player 2, but the players 2 remain silent, well, player 1 will be set free, while player 2 serves 10 years in prison. The other possible scenario is that the player 1 remains silent, but the player 2 betrays player 1. So player 1 will serve 10 years in prison and player 2 will be set free. But this is the key part of the game. Why? Because you are in a solitary confinement, right? And you are thinking, okay, they do not have enough proof, but we have to be in prison for 2 years. This is a minimum. Okay. However, they are offering me a bargaining here, which is if I betray my partner, I will get free, which is better, right? But if I remain silent and my partner rat me out, I'm going to be 10 years in prison, which is the worst scenario ever. So what should I do? Trust in my partner or say anything to save myself? This is very important. There is no communication, and the offer is very attractive. But it's very attractive not because of me. I mean, not because they are only giving me the opportunity to not pay any single day in prison, but also because if I remain silent and my partner betrays me, I'm going to pay the worst scenario ever. So this is very strategic. My decision is not going to depend only on myself. It depends also on the actions of the other players. This is game theory. And this is very related to trade. But let's solve this game first. So we have the two players, Each player has the same strategies, cooperate or betray. Cooperate is not rat, remain silent, and betray is ratting out the other player or betray the other player. So these are the strategies, cooperate, betray, cooperate, betray. Player one is depicted in green, player two is depicted in red. The matrix has some payoffs. Some payoffs are the rewards. The rewards that you are expecting after you choose these strategies. So the rewards or the payoffs for the player one are in green, and the payoffs of the player two are in red. How do we solve this type of games? So given that this is a game theory and this is a strategic game, so we have to make situations based on the decisions that the other player could decide. So for instance, player one could decide cooperate. So if the player one cooperates, the player one is analyzing, well, if I cooperate and the other player cooperate, I'm going to receive 2 years in prison because both are going to remain silent. So, well, sorry, I have a error here. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to be 2 years in prison, and that's it, right? So because my partner is going to be silent, so both we are going to cooperate each other, even we are not communicating each other. So this is the minimum that we have to pay in prison. However, if I cooperate, sorry, again, this was yes. Just give me 1 second, please. Well, yeah. So if I cooperate and the other guy betray, well, I'm going to receive 10 years. 10 years. And the other guy is going to be free. If I betray, on the other hand, and the player two remains silent, well, I'm going to receive 0, which is better for me, right? And if both of us betray, so both of us rat out each other, well, we are going to be in the worst possible scenario, which is that we have to be in 5 years. So what is the solution here? So the solution here is going to be depending on the decision of the other player. So given this scenario, you can see that cooperate, is the Pareto optimal. Which is the Pareto optimal? What is a Pareto optimal? A Pareto optimal is when no one can be made better off without someone being made worse off. That means that any change to make any person better off will make someone else worse off. So Pareto optimality is the best option or the best scenario in this situation or in this game. The Pareto optimality is when, yes, of course, we have to be in prison, but this is the minimum penalty that we are going to pay. The only way to make this decision for the player one better, which is that this guy is going to be free, is making the player to worse off, is incrementing or increasing, sorry, their penalty for their crime. The other way around, the only way to make him better off player two, which is putting in freedom, is increasing the penalty for player one. But because of these scenarios in which if I remain silent and the other guy betrays me, I'm going to be better, worse off. I prefer to betray. So betray dominates cooperation because I will try to get these zeros. I will try to get my freedom. I bite the bait. And because of that, every single player will decide to betray, and the equilibrium is betray. This is the Nash equilibrium. And what is a Nash equilibrium? The Nash equilibrium is when every single individual pursue his best strategy given the strategies of all other players. No one will unilaterally defect. If each player has chosen a strategy and no player can benefit by changing his strategy while the others keep theirs unchanged, these strategies and the corresponding payoffs constitute a Nash equilibrium. In this case, given that any of the players has incentive to remain silent, well, and when I select, if I were player one, and I select betray, I am making this decision because I'm taking into consideration that the other player also have own incentive to rat me out, because that player is trying to follow his freedom. And because of that, the police has enough proofs to give us the worst penalty in prison. So, but as you can see, betray and betrayed is the only possible outcome in this game. So there is not cooperation. But when we are talking about international trade and we try to explain the bargaining space, we are talking about cooperation because at the end, the countries want to reduce their tariffs, trusting that the other countries are reduce their tariffs also. So that could be a possibility of cooperation. So we have to answer, is cooperation possible in a personal dilemma? And then the answer is yes, there are three possibilities, but we are covering only the repeated game, as in the book. The repeated game is when this prisoner dilemma situation repeats over time. So, and that changed the strategies, not the strategies, but the incentives that the players have. Why? Because if you betray me today, the other player, or me, could betray you tomorrow. So if you betray me today and you broke the pact, the trust that we have, okay, tomorrow I will betray. So these future sanctions could be a deterrence for the betray strategy. So if the future sanctions are higher than the today's benefits, you prefer to cooperate. So if I betray you today, I should know that you will betray me tomorrow. And And if I know that that action could hurt me more than the possible benefits that I could receive today, I will prefer not to do it. And this is the basically idea of trade liberalization that is explained in the book. The trade liberalization is explained between the US and China. And both countries have the following strategies: liberalize and protect. And they could receive some payoffs. But we are going to analyze those payoffs as a follow. China, for instance, they prefer better protect, that China protect their economy and United States liberalize. Of course, this is the best outcome ever. Why? Because China is able to protect their non-competitive sectors, and they could sell and receive goods from the United States without any tariff and any barrier. So they are protecting their non-competitive sectors, and they are receiving the benefits of the liberal trade, the free trade, the free trade. This is the best outcome ever. It's the same in the US. Is liberalize China and protect United States. Is the best option? Yes, it's the best option because they are protecting their economy and they are getting the possibility of selling American goods in the Chinese market. The worst scenario is the very opposite. When they liberalize unilaterally and the other country protect. So no one has incentive to do that because as we previously explained here, because if I unilaterally liberalize and the other country doesn't do it, well, I'm going to be in the worst off scenario because I am not protecting my sectors, my non-competitive sectors, and I am not able to sell my products in the other market. So that's why both countries prefer this option at least, no? And as the worst option ever. They also do not want protection. Protect. Why? Well, because protect is not a very good option because they know that if they liberalize, they could receive all the benefits that economics models foresee. No, we already explained these models, and the conclusion of the models are, well, you will be better off. You will receive you will achieve higher levels of utility, and you will get an increment of efficiency. So protection is not an option. However, protection is better if I liberalize unilaterally, because if I liberalize unilaterally, again, I'm not able to receive the benefits of the international market, and I am affecting my non-competitive sectors. And the second best option is liberalize. Why? Well, because they know that free trade is good, but if they could protect their non-competitive sectors, this is a better scenario. So because of that, protect is a strategy that dominates the international market. And because of that, everyone ends protecting their economy. However, the international market isn't a repetitive game. We are every single day commercialize our products. So if we betray our partners today, we know that not only the other country could take reprimands because of our actions, but also if these countries are within the WTO agreements, well, they could sue us, and the WTO is going to impose or sanctions, and other countries could give us sanctions also, and the punishment could be higher than we prefer to keep our promises and liberalize. But this is a story that doesn't end here, and we are going to expand this concept in the next chapter, in the next class. So thank you so much. I hope that you could enjoy this class, and let's see us in the next class. So thank you so much. See you later.